Tonight, I will be telling 10 stories, over 2 hours of content coming from my subreddit, and the very generous authors over on nosleep. From stories of abandoned houses and, you know what, we have it all this time around. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers for allowing me to share their stories. Without them, this video wouldn't have been possible. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. It really does help out a lot more than you may think. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Every neighborhood has one. That creepy, old house that nobody wants to go near. They're usually surrounded by overgrown trees and bushes. Parts of the siding have fallen to the ground due to neglect from whomever lives there. Dusty, old windows around the house only gives you a hazy glimpse of the shabby curtain hung in front of it. Of course, rumors would always be spread around the neighborhood about it being haunted or cursed. One particular house in my neighborhood checked every single one of those boxes, including the one about how an old, creepy hermit lived inside. I've only seen the owner of the house a few times, usually yelling from her windows at the children who have wandered too close to her home. Some of the kids occasionally taunted her yelling, public sidewalk," with their arms outstretched, almost daring her to come make them leave. She never did. She would always rabble on incoherently and slam the windows shut. One particular night, I was walking my dog and past her house. As my dog stopped to sniff a very exciting patch of grass that had grown through the sidewalk, I took a second to look up to the house. One window was lit up and I could see through the sliver between the curtains. It was her. She was frantically talking to herself. I obviously couldn't hear what she was saying, but she seemed to be going back and forth between arguing with herself and then pleading with herself. A frown drooped across my face as I watched her yank at her hair while continuing her solo rant. I could see her throw clumps of hair to the floor after each yank. I hurried my dog along, and we continued home. Now, I've left out one particular feature of this horror house. Several of the windows were lined with old, creepy dolls. They were usually just piled up on the windowsill and all facing outward, staring at you from an already spooky house. I've never gotten close enough to really take a look at one of the dolls, but they were clearly old and decrepit. I've always assumed they were to frighten off the neighborhood kids, as most of the dolls looked purposely mangled, almost as if it looked as terrifying as possible. If that was her intent, she succeeded. My hell, they were horrific. Did you hear? My girlfriend asked me as I dried off one of the last dishes. Old Lady Higgins died last night. I saw the ambulance haul her off. I guess living to a ripe old age of 200 was a bit too much for her. She continued. Lori had been my girlfriend for 2 years now, and we had just barely moved in together. This was our first venture as full-fledged adults on our own, so we were that stereotypical excited couple, enjoying the wonders of our newfound freedom. Okay, first off, I never knew that was her name. Did you know her? I asked with a smirk as she dried her hands. No, my grandma told me. I guess they went to school together. She said she was always the weird girl in the corner who just doodled all day. She replied. Well, the crazy hit her pretty hard as she got older then. Still, it's always sad to see someone go, I offered, feeling a bit guilty about my first statement. I wonder what they're going to do with her house, she said in an echoing voice while talking into her coffee cup. What are you guys talking about? Paul said as he walked into the kitchen. He had stayed the night after our poker session from the previous night, when it went a bit longer than we thought. Paul was my best friend, and we'd often lose track of time when we hung out. Oh, that's crazy. Old lady up the street passed away last night. We were just talking about what's going to happen with her house, I replied, as I sat at the kitchen table with Lori. You mean that decaying old lump of a house? I didn't even know anyone still lived there. It looks condemned, he said with his eyebrows lifted. Probably should be, I replied. Hey, let's go check it out, Paul shouted excitedly. What? Lori yelped as she slammed her coffee cup a little harder than expected on the table. If she had any family, they probably won't be around for a while to get her stuff. I've always wanted to know what it looked like in there, although those dolls give me the creeps. He said almost in a salesman-like pitch. I scoffed. Nah, man, I'm good. Paul slumped his shoulders to show his disappointment. How about we just go take a peek in the windows? Seriously, my curiosity is killing me, he said, lifting his hands up on either side. I looked towards Lori. She shrugged her shoulders. It's up to you guys, she said, as she lifted herself from her chair. Apparently, Paul's little sales pitch worked, as we were soon venturing out towards the creepy house. Its ominous presence seemed to be quite a bit more menacing knowing the house was now vacant. A hesitation came over all three of us as we stood at the sidewalk of the house. We looked at each other for a bit of approval and began our walk. The crunching of the dead leaves and sticks under our feet reminded me of old horror movies where it would get quiet right before the big scare. A sense of thrill came over me as we walked around the side of the house. I looked towards Paul, who immediately bit his bottom lip with his eyes lit up, as if to dare me to peek in. I did. To my disappointment, the dirt on the window paired with the dark, unlit room made it impossible to see anything. The only thing I could clearly make out was an old wooden chair backed up against the closest wall. I sighed and looked towards Paul. Guys? Lori said under her breath. We both turned to see Lori pointing towards another portion of the house. We walked over slowly to see what she was trying to point out. I snapped my head back as I saw an open window to the house's basement. We all gazed at each other for several seconds of quietness. We all had the same idea, but it was Paul that piped up. I say we go in, he demanded. I looked to Lori for her thoughts. Screw it, she said in a laughing tone. Without thinking, we marched towards the window. Paul, being the most eager of the three of us, made his way in first. It was a smaller window, but just enough room to make our way in. I heard a thud as he dropped to the ground. You good, man? I said, squinting into the dark basement. Yeah, come on down, he yelled from the echoed room. I made my way in, followed by Lori. A fright came over me as I tried to gather my surroundings. We were actually in the creepy old lady's house. This was so crazy. A lone light bulb flickered on in the center of the concrete room. Paul had found the light switch. Oh, thank God, Lori exclaimed. A quick tour of the basement area showed nothing much. It was mostly empty aside from a few boxes and old furniture. We found the stairwell and made our way up. We were in luck as, while lights were far and few between, the electricity was still on. As we made it to the first floor, I felt a resignation, as I assumed the upper levels were going to offer even more mediocrity. I was wrong. I was so wrong. We entered the living room area. What stared back at us gave all three of us a shock. Dolls. Hundreds and hundreds of dolls littered the entire room. These things weren't just in the windows. The entire place was filled with them, all of them mangled and deformed in their own unique ways. Every single doll had its eyes cut out, leaving only two black voids staring back at us. This was terrifying. I jumped in fright as Paul yelled, breaking the silence. What in the hell is going on here? This lady was some kind of weird hoarder. I guess, man, I said as I panned the room. We continued walking while stepping over doll after doll. We made it down the hallway to the kitchen. At least, I think there was a kitchen underneath the blanket of dolls. I think we should leave now, Lori said while folding her arms in discomfort. Paul clicked his tongue in disappointment and glared at her. No, man, I think she's right. Let's go, I said sternly. You can go if you want to. I'm going to explore a bit. This is crazy, he replied as he continued his way to the next room. We wished him luck and turned back towards the living room and stairway to the basement. As we approached the top of the stairs, something happened that terrified me to the core. The loudest scream I have ever heard filled the entirety of the house. It was a blood-curdling scream of terror from a female. Lori grabbed me in a hug with a frightened yelp. What the hell was that? I said, trying to keep my voice down, realizing someone else was here. I don't know, but I say Paul is on his own. If he doesn't want to leave after hearing that, it's on him, she whispered, holding me tighter. I nodded, and we began our trek down the stairs to get out of this terror house. As we approached the halfway point of the stairs, we were once again startled by a door slamming behind us. We looked at each other in confusion. There was no door at the top of the stairway before. We stared at each other in concern. We looked up as the single, hanging light bulb began to flicker. Another startle hit us as yet another door slammed shut was heard. This time, it was the bottom of the stairs. "What the hell is going on here?" I said as I felt my voice break with every word. Lori simply stared at the door in fright. I put my hand on her back to guide her down the rest of the way. We arrived at the now closed door. I turned the knob to open it. It swung open, and to our horror, more stairs. Another flight of stairs continued with the basement at the bottom. "I can't do this. Let's go," Lori yelled, grabbing my hand. We proceeded to the bottom of the new set of stairs. I almost tripped over as the light bulb flickered off. I grabbed Lori immediately. It was pitch black. We had to continue though. We carefully took one step at a time as to not fall. We continued blindly with one hand outstretched. "Ouch," I yelled as I stubbed my finger into a solid surface. We had reached the door. I slowly turned the doorknob. Horror coursed through me at what I was seeing. We were back in the living room, dolls strewn across the room, all blank and emotionless with those black, cold eyes. Lori began crying as I held her tighter. "We have to find Paul," I said almost involuntarily. We proceeded into the direction Paul had went. A long hallway led us to 2 more rooms as well as the staircase upstairs. Both rooms were filled with knickknacks and old furniture. Oh, and of course, more dolls. As if we weren't freaked out enough, the dolls gave us a lifeless, terrifying gaze as we made our way through the house. "Paul? Paul?" Lori yelled up the staircase. We made our way up, hoping to not have another staircase incident. Luckily, nothing happened. Yet. "Paul, are you up here? Paul?" Lori continued, her jittery pleas to get his attention. Nothing. "I'd say let's split up, but I've seen way too many horror movies to know that's not a good idea," I said, attempting to lighten the mood. The fright was too deep, though. We continued our search for several more minutes in an eerie silence. As we approached yet another room, I heard something behind us. I turned around, and in the unwell-lit hallway, I saw Paul, just standing there. I could barely make out his face as it was shadowed, but I saw his expression. He was staring with a smile bigger than any I've ever seen him make. His eyes glared at us with an almost evil-looking intent. "Paul, is that you? What are you doing? Let's get the hell out of here," I ordered. Lori looked back as well. I could see the look of confusion paired with fright on her face from the corner of my eye. I began walking towards him with an almost inhuman speed. Paul ran quickly into one of the bedrooms. I looked at Lori in fright. I had to get my friend and get out of here. I walked towards the room and peered in. Paul was gone. A bed, covered in those damn dolls, was all that filled the room. I walked inside with Lori behind me. I'm 100% sure he ran in here, but he's nowhere to be seen. We turned to leave, but we were suddenly stopped by the now closed door. No slam this time, just a closed door. I wasn't having it anymore. I quickly opened the door. Lori fell to her knees and began sobbing. The door led us back to the living room, and the same doll stared back at us. I don't know what... I stopped mid-sentence as I looked back at Lori. She was crouched down and sobbing in the living room. I looked back at the other side of the door. Another living room. We were stuck between 2 identical rooms. I grabbed Lori's wrist and began searching through the living room for anything I could to bust one of these windows out and make our escape. At the edge of the room, the same old wooden chair I saw from the outside sat. I stomped my way over, kicking dolls out of my way in anger. I grabbed the chair and immediately began smashing it against the window I had originally peeked into when we arrived. It was working. The window began to crack and eventually shattered. I looked out to the ground to prepare for our escape. No words can accurately explain the fright that came over me. What I witnessed as I turned to Lori was horrific. A slimy, green, deformed thing stared back at me. Its pale, green bulging skin was glistening in the little light there was as it reached out to me with its limbs that seemed to be bent and broken in different angles. It let out a gurgled moan as it began towards me. I let out a primal yell and began to run. I didn't make it far before I tripped over the chair I used to smash the window. The creature made its way on top of me and began screaming in that same gurgled voice. Moisture from its head dripped on my face as I yelled in terror. I could see its skin bubbling under the deformations as it attacked. "Babe? Babe!" I heard Lori yell. I opened my eyes and slid back, hitting my head on the windowsill. The monster was gone. Lori looked at me with a look of confusion and fright. "What? Who?" I frantically said, not knowing what to actually say. "I don't know what happened. You went over to the chair and just sat in it. A little bit later, you just began freaking out on the ground and pulling at your hair. What happened?" she said quickly. I didn't want to tell her what I had just seen. I wiped the tears from my eyes and stood up. "We have to keep trying to get out of here," I said. I'd had enough. We shuffled through more dolls to reach the stairway to the basement, the stairway that scared us so much, but we had to try. I shook my head as the stairway was blocked by a door. I opened it up with Lori clutching my arm. I stared in defeat as I was looking into the upstairs bedroom Paul had darted into. Dolls. And that same bed greeted me as if to say, "You're not going anywhere." I walked into the room with my head down, leaned up against one of the bedposts and let out a sigh. Lori cleared some of the dolls to make a spot on the bed and slumped down. There were several minutes of silence. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something on a nightstand. It was a book. I don't know why, but I moved to check it out. Helen Higgins was written on the front. It was a diary. I looked over towards Lori, who was still sitting on the bed with her face cupped in her hands. It seemed very far-fetched, but this old lady clearly knew the house. Maybe the diary would offer information on how to leave it. It started out as any diary would, talking about her day, people she would interact with, etc. After a few minutes of reading, it got far worse. The beginning seemed to be when she was in her early 20s, with the later excerpts being decades later. Her ramblings became more incoherent as the pages flipped. Towards the end is when her entries became much darker. Her ramblings became much more disturbing, as she spoke of people watching her from the windows, trying to get into the house. She would yell and scream at them to go away, but they persisted for years. A few excerpts gave me an insight into her strange behaviors. Yes, after a lot of research, I finally found out how to get rid of these damn intruders. They are not welcome here, and they will know it. The dolls will work. Scary. I will make them scary, and the evil trespassers will not want in. More dolls will keep them away. Yeah, they will know they can't come in. They will lose interest in my house, in me. Not working. The book said it would work. These people are still getting in. Why aren't they afraid? Mistakes. I've made mistakes. No, they live in them. The very thing that was supposed to keep them out is where they dwell. I invited them in without knowing. I found my old diary. I missed you. It's been decades. I've lived with my demons in seclusion. I hate them. They hate me. They haunt me when I'm awake. They haunt me when I'm asleep. They are evil. They delight in torturing my mind. I'm so glad I found you, diary. You're all I have now. I covered my mouth in shock as I read the last entry. No more. It will end. Thank you, my diary, for being there for me. This day will be my last. My tortures will finally be over. Only blank pages followed. I carefully put the diary back on the nightstand as I looked over at Lori. She seemed to be catatonic. Lori, babe, I'm going to get us out of here, I said, attempting to add confidence to my voice. She continued staring forward. I lifted my head up as I realized something was happening. From the walls of the room I heard voices. What seemed like hundreds and hundreds of voices were emanating from all four walls. There were so many. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but they were getting louder. I covered my ears as they continued their ramblings at us. I looked up at Lori, who was still staring ahead with no emotion. Just as suddenly as the voices began, they stopped. I clenched my teeth in anger. Without a word, I grabbed Lori's wrist and began to lead her out. No, I can't, she said, sobbing. Lori, I'm going to get us out of here. No matter how much of this damn maze we have to go through, I'll get you home, I demanded. She wiped the tears from her eyes and quickly nodded. I was just glad to have even a little bit of my girl back. We proceeded out into the hallway. I felt a strength in me, as I was determined to get through this and get us back to safety. My strength faded quickly though, as I looked left and right into the hallway to determine our next move. Something was staring at us. At the end of the hall, a silhouette of a man was just standing there. The shadowy form was dressed in an old-fashioned outfit. He was not from our time, dressed in an old dust coat and top hat. We stared at each other for several seconds as I contemplated what to do next. His face was pure black, but from the emptiness, I saw a toothy smile begin to form. No eyes, no features, just a grin is all that looked back at me. I shook my head and darted towards the stairs with Lori. We made it to the living room. As if everything we'd gone through wasn't enough, we were met with more stairs. The dolls, those damn dolls, were all staring at us. We stood in silence as we looked around in terror. Deformed and mangled faces glared at us as we slowly proceeded towards the stairway. We entered the stairwell and began our descent. I would say I prepared myself for whatever horrors these evil spirits that dwell here had for us, but that was impossible. To my astonishment, nothing. No twists and turns, no voices or screams. We'd made it to the basement. A look of excitement was on Lori's face as we stood at the open window we had climbed into to start this nightmare. Apprehension fell over me as I wondered if this could be another cruel trick. As we continued to stare in disbelief, loud, heavy footsteps came hurtling down the stairs. Damn it, go, I ordered Lori. We hastily climbed out the window to avoid whatever was stomping down the stairs towards us. We both crawled on all fours through the dead leaves and twigs towards the backyard wall. I turned towards the window with my back flat against the concrete wall. My eyes were wide open as I stared. The window slowly closed. It creaked shut with a soft clicking sound. The window closed and we were free from this terror. We walked back to our house with heads hung down. Lori continued her sobbing as I held her. As we sat down on our living room couch, I began sobbing as well, but we were safe. We broke our lease and moved out as quickly as possible. We could not stand even being near that house. The events of that day was 4 decades ago. I still have nightmares from the brief time I was there. Lori was never the same. I've remained with her, trying to help her recover, but what happened to us was far too scarring. In an almost face your fears type of move, I returned to the neighborhood today. The house, that house of dolls, was still there. Dolls filled the windows just as they had 40 years ago. The house was more overgrown with foliage and as decrepit as ever. A group of children on bicycles pulled up inquiring as to why I was just staring at this house. We chatted for a few about the house, but I did not want to tell them my story. Apparently, old Miss Higgins was a member of a very rich family that owned the house. I guess it was just another page in a book as they've all but forgotten it, to let it rot. Although, the kids did inform me of a resident in the house. He can be seen sometimes, blabbering to himself and yelling at kids that pass by. The local kids have named him Crazy Old Paul. I got into urban exploration in my early teens, and ever since, it was pretty much my go-to activity whenever my free time coincided with decent weather. Despite multiple forums and videos on the topic incessantly suggesting that one should go with a group, I usually went alone, since I had very few friends and most of them lived in other states. Much to my surprise, in my first year of college I finally met someone who was also into this exploration thing. Damien and I had little in common aside from our weird fascination with decaying empty structures. so I wouldn't exactly call us best friends. I even harbored a slight, latent resentment to him sometimes, since he looked like the typical upper middle class hipster, always with a fresh haircut, wearing a dapper business casual outfit, whereas I was perpetually broke. Frankly, I was skeptical that someone like Damien would actually enjoy urban exploration, but all our differences aside, I could at least count on him to show up on time at the specified location, and this time was no different. It was an abandoned psychiatric asylum in an isolated semi-forested part of the suburbs, relatively easy to access, yet less popular than most other spots around the city. In other words, perfect location. After getting off the train and walking for about 15 minutes along a desolate road, we turned onto a narrow trail, which led into the surrounding forest. We had to make our way through thorny bushes and mud, before finally seeing a dark gray silhouette of a 6-story stone building. Everything inside me was tingling with anticipation as we approached the gloomy structure, and I reveled in the bleak atmosphere of the place. My companion, however, was a bit twitchy. On our way through the forest, he cut himself a few times, which, judging by the sounds he was making, was quite painful. Man, are you sure there's no other way to get to this hospital or whatever it is? I mean, you can try to walk through the backyards of adjacent properties and get arrested for trespassing. Either that or you follow me. I briefly turned around to see if Damien was keeping up with me. Okay, fine. I'm just asking, 'cause all these thorns, you know? We finally arrived at a paved parking lot in front of the asylum. All doors had padlocks on them, but we managed to slip in through a window. Inside the place was dark and moist, the walls glistening in the scarce gray light that made it in through mostly boarded up windows. An occasional drop of water from the ceiling sent high-pitched ringing echoes down the empty hallways and rooms, and pieces of broken glass and tiles cracked under our feet, announcing every step and making it almost impossible to move around silently. The heavy cold air moved reluctantly in and out of my lungs, filling my nose with a bitter, earthy smell of mold and rotting wood. I heard Damien cough several times as he pulled up the collar of his jacket, leaving only his eyes exposed. A moment of awkward silence passed, and I was finally reassured that we are the only ones in the asylum, which meant I could stop listening for any suspicious sounds for the time being. I pulled out my cheap digital camcorder and hit record. "Move out of the frame, will you?" I theatrically waved to Damien, observing his startled expression. Seeing his reactions to my nonchalant attitude was oddly amusing, but I did my best to maintain civil appearances. We slowly moved in and out of rooms and through hallways, exchanging sparse, meaningless sentences in the process, until we reached the stairs on the far end of the west wing. The staircase was drowning in darkness, somehow impenetrable for the weak sunlight from the hall, and even the flashlight on Damien's phone could barely break the darkness, giving only faint outlines of the next couple of steps right below our feet. It is now that I realize that much less light was coming in from outside than I expected, and that was the reason I decided flashlights were unnecessary this time. By my logic, no one should bother boarding up windows this heavily on a building that's barely even known among local residents. Whatever the case was, we slowly started making our way upstairs, holding onto the walls, guided by a thin sliver of light escaping from under the door to the next floor upstairs. As my fingers traced the rough brickwork, I could feel something wet and vicious on it. I was briefly grossed out, but I thought I'd rather soil my hands than smash into the wall head first. The door to the second floor luckily wasn't locked, but it still took a few good pushes to crack it open. To our relief, the second floor was not as dark, and not nearly as much windows were covered. At this moment, I finally looked down at my left hand, the one that touched the wall. A thick, brownish liquid was covering my fingertips, hitting my nose with a putrid stench. As I brought my hand closer to my face, a thick lump rose up in my throat from the depths of my stomach, and I instinctively tried to wipe the unknown substance off my hand on the nearest relatively clean surface. "What's up, Jerry?" Damien faked a concerned voice, seeing how I frantically rubbed my palm against one of the plywood boards lying around. "Just got some muck on my hands. No big deal. And stop calling me that." I'm not even sure why, but hearing Damien call me by my nickname was extremely irritating, and despite initially hoping that he would just forget it, I now regretted letting him in on the nickname at all. Jerry was a thing for close friends, and maybe some family members. Not him. My camcorder was still rolling, so I tried to reduce shaking to a minimum as we walked further down the hallway, poking our heads into the patients' rooms that we passed. Most of them were completely empty, aside from the occasional broken chair or a metal IV stand on tiny wheels. At the end of the hallway was a wide, open area that looked like it could have once been a common living room, and it too was mostly empty and poorly illuminated. My eyes instantly caught a single hospital bed positioned right in the center of the room. It was stripped down to its metal frame, all rusted and covered in small dents. Impossible to tell, man-made or not. The springs, which once held up the mattress, now sagged in the middle, corroded by age and weather. A pair of handcuffs hanging from the top rail of the headboard. Slightly less rusty than the bed itself, more edgy than creepy, I scoffed to myself. Maybe some other explorers who've been here before us left them as a kind of scare prank, but I couldn't say I wasn't into it. "Hey, can you take a picture of me on this bed?" A half question, half demand came from Damien. I shrugged, put away the camcorder, and stretched my hand out to get my friend's iPhone, as he was making himself comfortable in the bed. "Do you want me to get the whole room in, or just yourself?" "I don't know, a couple of takes each." I took a few pictures of Damien doing poses on the bed from where I stood, capturing him as well as some graffiti in the background, and then headed towards the foot of the bed. He thought he was being funny by making faces and such. Taking a few more high-angle shots of Damien, I placed the sole of my boots against the metal frame, right in between where his feet were resting, as if claiming the bed my trophy. "Can you stop doing that?" Damien frowned. "Doing what?" "Standing like that over me. No offense, dude. It's just weird." "Whatever. Would this do?" I shrugged, handing over the phone and secretly hoping that my companion is satisfied with the pictures and doesn't ask me to take more. He sat up and started swiping through the camera roll. I remained standing next to him, using the opportunity to quickly review the footage on my camcorder. Surprisingly enough, it wasn't as dark as I feared it would be. I get to the part where we entered the staircase, and decided that since there was probably nothing to see anyway, I can skip a few seconds. But when I paused the video, the staircase didn't exactly look right in the freeze frame. I went back a few frames in there. Half flight, down towards where I assumed was the basement, loomed a dark silhouette that looked too much like a human, but couldn't have been any of our shadows. The sickening feeling and the numbness from before came back. I felt the tips of my fingers grow cold. Nausea crept up as I processed what I saw in that frame. The person saw us, but just stood there motionlessly. They let us walk right past them without making a single noise, and devil knows for how long they've been standing like that. That's not what one does when exploring. I had no clue how we could have missed it on our way there, but now I felt trapped. My only hope was that the opposite wing of the building had another open and undamaged staircase. At that point, I no longer cared about getting more footage or further exploring that place. As calmly as I could, I called out to Damien, showing him the still frame for my recording, and telling him that we should get out before the staircase stranger confronts us. For a brief moment, he suspected me of bullshitting him, then tried to rationalize it away, but eventually came to the same unsettling conclusion that I did, gradually descending into quiet panic. We slowly got up, straining our ears to pick up sounds that would signify someone's approach, but the whole building suddenly fell dead silent. We made a few cautious steps in the direction of the eastern wing, and stopped again to listen. The plan was to walk at a normal pace like we didn't notice anything, and as soon as we got out of the building, we were going to run to the train station. Just as I was about to make another step, the silence was shattered by a raspy, metallic screech that came from the same direction we did 10 minutes earlier. It sounded like chunks of corroded metal grinding against each other. Suddenly I felt like my guts were suspended in zero gravity, cold beads of sweat forming on the back of my neck. I shot a quick glance at Damien, and at that same instant, we took off through the damp, dark corridors, nearly tripping over various trash scattered about. I could still hear the intermittent dragging, or I thought I could hear it. I don't know. Maybe I was hearing things in between Damien's and my own heavy, uneven breathing. I desperately fought the nagging desire to turn around and look back, but I couldn't risk tripping and falling. After a couple turns, a door with a staircase sign appeared further ahead, slightly ajar. This gave us a small but much needed burst of energy. We squeezed through the narrow opening and stumbled down the steps, skipping 2 at a time as some of them were missing. Not bothering with trying to find our original entry point, we burst out through the nearest open window, landing awkwardly onto the wet, cracked pavement overgrown with weeds. Tearing my way through thick undergrowth, I ran in the direction of the road, not paying attention to thorns and branches slitting my skin, listening to Damien's footsteps close behind me. Shaking and out of breath, we eventually reached the train station. It looked like we were the only people there, and I wasn't even sure if security cameras were working, but we were lucky to see a train slowly roll up to the platform just moments later. We tried to talk on our way home, but neither of us could hold up the conversation, so we ended up spending most of the train ride in silence. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I made a half-conscious decision to not get in touch with Damien for a while after I get home. I wasn't exactly looking for another "you ruined my day" whining session anytime soon. Fast forward to several days later, I received a message from Damien on Facebook, but I didn't open or read it. He probably blamed me for ruining our little exploration trip, and although I myself felt responsible, I didn't need any of his opinion on this. Not today. No, not in the mood. And so the message has escaped my memory for the next couple of days. Sitting in class, I noticed the empty seat where I'd usually see my friend, but other than that, I didn't pay much attention to my surroundings or the lecture. That is, until our professor announced that Damien was reported missing, and asked anyone who knew anything about his disappearance to come forward with information. A weird mixture of emotions washed over me, ranging from guilt to a passive, melancholic dread, all while I struggled to hold my poker face. But there was no way on earth this would be related to our weekend visit at the asylum. It couldn't be. We ran out of there together. The message from earlier came to the forefront of my mind again. The lecture ended, and as soon as I left the auditorium, I grabbed my phone and opened the messenger app. I noticed just now that the message, in fact, was a link to some obscure file-sharing website. It opened to a single picture of Damien, the one I took in the asylum. The high-angle shot from the foot of the hospital bed, Damien lying on it with a smug look on his face. Timestamp on the message indicated that it was sent yesterday at 2:37 a.m. At this point, I was starting to get nervous, but this text, unsettling as it was, proved no clue as to what happened or where Damien was. I could report it to the cops, but just as I was about to put the phone away, it buzzed in my hand. Another message from Damien. Another link to the same website. I tapped on it with a shaky finger. Another picture. It looks almost identical to my shot from before, except this one is darker and somewhat blurrier. And Damien, gagged and handcuffed to the bed, his swollen, bruised face contorted into a painful grimace with bulging, bloodshot eyes, unnaturally rolled up. Below, a massive gash in his abdomen, spilling blood on his naked body, and partially revealing the intestines. But as gruesome as it was, the remarkable similarity between it and my photo made it so much worse. Same room, same goddamn bed, same angle and shot composition, and I swear I could even see at the very bottom a cropped off part of someone's foot, propped against the rusted frame. Then I noticed something else. Unlike the first one, this photo had a caption below it. "This is how you take a picture, Jerry." Be careful on the internet, because some of the sick stuff out there will scar your soul. It all happened when I was just browsing the internet, scrolling through different posts and things like that. I was watching YouTube and an ad appeared to the left of my screen. It was some sort of skeleton mask and words underneath saying, "Want a good scare? Click here." I ignored it like I do with every other advertisement and moved on. I then saw it back again on another video I clicked on. So my curiosity piqued and I clicked on the damn skeleton. I wish I never clicked on that damn skeleton. It brought me to this website that really didn't have much on it, except a About Us section and a phone number for contact. So I clicked on the About Us section and it brought up a chat box. It said, "What can I help you with?" Thinking it was some dumb robot, I said, "What do you guys do?" I hit enter on my keyboard and I waited for a response. The person replied and said, "We are an extreme scare group that will scare you or your friends for nothing in return. We have groups located in every US state. Please contact this phone number for more information. Goodbye now. So, that is all the info they could give me. I did the only thing anyone else would have done. Called the phone. I called it, and it didn't pick up. Someone then texted me from that number. Hello, I'm your skeleton associate. How may I help? I thought that this had to be some scam or something. Like, when are they going to ask for my credit card number or something? Anyways, I texted back. Scare me. Easy 2 words that I never put too much thought into. He replied with, yes, we have a team in North Carolina waiting approval. I said, what approval? He sent 3 different waivers. He said, fill these out and we shall start. I was really interested now and filled them out, reading some of it over, but thought to myself, how bad could it be? This probably would be the best example on why you should always read the fine print. He said, great, confirmation is complete. They are on their way now. I replied with, what do you mean, on their way? He ended the messages with, enjoy your time, SM. Well, that was a waste of time. What did he mean by on their way? Like, who was on their way? It's weird that he got my state, but that's from my postal code. Maybe he just is trying to scare me. I looked up the phone number online and nothing came up. 0 information. It was like a ghost. I quickly called back the phone number that I called earlier, and with my luck it said, this line has been disconnected. Please call back later. Thank you. Well, shit. Later that night, I was walking my dog. We went around the block like always, so nothing different except there was. The strange thing that night, there was a van parked a little bit away from my house. A car or 2 away. It was a black van with someone in it. I couldn't make out anything because it was very far away. I told my dog to hurry up, and I started walking back to my house. As I was walking back to my house, I saw who was in the van. It was a man dressed in all black with a skeleton skull mask that wrapped all the way around his head. There was black covering his eyes, so I couldn't see who was wearing it. He was just staring at me, walking back to my house. My stomach dropped as I saw this, remembering what I clicked on earlier with the skeleton ad, and how they were on their way to me. Fuck. I really didn't think he was telling the truth. How did this group even find me so quick? Maybe it was because of my stupid mistake of clicking on that stupid ad in the first place. I was looking over my shoulder until I got back in my house, closed the front door and locked it. I never was so shaken up about anything until this point. I knew that they were here for me. I didn't know if I should call the cops or not. Like, why were they just sitting out there? There was a spotlight on their car from the streetlight that I could see from my window. I was peeking out my bedroom blinds, and all of a sudden the streetlight went out. It just sparked up and blew a socket or something. Then I saw 3 men get out of the back of the van. They were all wearing the same damn mask. Skeleton. I was freaking out at this point. I had no idea what to do. I had a couple of knives that I had collected over the years and took one from my closet. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I heard a crash of breaking glass downstairs. Fuck. They're in the house. They broke the living room window, and I heard them walking around downstairs. They were also talking, saying something about, don't hurt him, just bring him with us. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I was relieved for a second, and then heard one coming up the steps. My adrenaline shot back up, and I was in fight or flight mode now. I felt so damn ready for one of these pricks to just come into my room, and I was going to stab them so fast they wouldn't even see it coming. Then all I saw from the corner of my eye, a man wearing a skeleton mask holding an axe. He screamed at me, "Get down. I won't hurt you if you just listen." The other man that was coming up the stairs had jumped on me, throwing the knife away from me. We wrestled until the other man in the room came over and put a plastic bag around my head. Suffocating, I passed out and fell unconscious. I woke up somewhere. I had no clue where I was. I was strapped to this chair in the middle of this concrete building. There was nothing except concrete. I then heard they had kidnapped me, and I could be miles from home now. Hell, I could be miles from civilization now. This place looked like it had been abandoned for years. All of a sudden, I heard a noise. It came from behind me and it was a loud bang, like something had dropped on the ground. It echoed through the building. "Hello? Peter? Are you ready to play our game?" "Get the fuck out of here, you sick fuck." I was so pissed that he thought kidnapping someone was a game. I said, "You're a psychopath, you know." He replied laughing, "Oh, I've known that for years. tell me something new. I was in a bad situation and had to think how to get out. He said, "Do you like swimming?" As soon as he said that, the 3 men came back out. One of them kicked the chair down so I was laying on my back with my hands and feet still tied. They laid a dirty rag over my face and started pouring gallons of water on me. If this is the worst, I don't know what is. They waterboarded me for what seemed to be like hours. To my knowledge, it was only a couple minutes. I passed out from the loss of oxygen. Felt like I was drowning, and I couldn't do anything but take it. I later woke up in a dark room. It had 6 walls of concrete and a ultraviolet light. There was a message on the wall written in some type of paint, only viewed in the purple light. It glowed, "Welcome to hell." I thought to myself that there isn't much I could say that wouldn't make this place seem like hell. Someone came in and kneed me in my face. My nose bleeding, I fell on the ground. It was a cold, hard ground. He said, "Let's go play, shall we, Peter?" It was the same skeleton man. He picked me up and threw a black mask over my face so I couldn't see anything. I was dropped in a dark room that was very gross and smelled awful. I couldn't see anything in there, but the smell made me want to puke. I gagged a couple of times. I then heard a whisper. It was very faint, but I made it out to be an old man. He was saying something like, "Help me," and it was coming from the corner of the room. I crawled over, and what I saw terrifies me to this day. It was an old man with a giant gash sliced across his stomach. He had his hands on it. Blood was everywhere. I can still imagine that sight to this day. He said one other thing to me. "Run." There was a bang, and a door opened. I smelt gasoline and heard a chainsaw start up, the humming of the engine ripping in my ears. I was shoved away from the giant man. He had a skeleton mask on and had a chainsaw in his hands. He went at the old man lying on the ground. I heard him scream. That scream haunts me to this day. I ran out of that room as fast as I could. I ran into a hallway that was made of concrete and no windows. Multiples of the same exact room. It was like tiny little torture rooms. It was horrifying. I knew if I stopped running that I would be dead. It came to 2 turns. I went left, and someone was standing in the middle of the hallway. I turned around as quick as possible, and that man with the chainsaw grabbed me with his bloody hands and took me to the ground. I hit my head against the concrete, and that man put a syringe in my neck. I fell asleep instantly. I was violently awoken by someone throwing me in the back of a van. The doors were shut and locked. No windows. This was the same exact van that was out front of my house the other night. It was shaky. There were tons of bumps along the way. It was like we were on a gravel road or something. I had my head covered with a bag and my mouth taped shut. There were cable ties around my hands and feet. I was sliding all over the place in the back of that van. The sunlight shone through the bag as the door was opened. Someone said, "Grab him," and took me outside. I was pushed down on my hands on what felt like sand. It made sense. And all, I kind of lived near the Outer Banks. I was familiar with the feel of that sand, and someone violently took the bag off and ripped off the tape from my mouth. I said, crying, "I just want to go home. Please don't kill me." Looking down, I started to break down. There was an empty coffin made of wood dug out from the sand of the beach. I looked around and no one was to be seen for miles. There were also 4 shovels and 4 men standing around me, all wearing the same skeleton mask. I cried once again, "You don't have to do this. I have a family." At that point, I was sobbing and couldn't stop. Someone took me by my arms and said, "Get in." They pushed me down into the coffin. Someone quickly closed the coffin and I was stuck in it. There was a video camera that had a red blinking light above me. These sick fucks are recording me. My hands still zip-tied. I was hopeless. I heard sand being poured over the coffin. Little by little, I felt the oxygen leaving the coffin. I was being buried alive. I knew if I started to panic, that I would lose air more quickly by hyperventilating. I started to breathe very slowly, waiting for my death, waiting for my last hopeless breath of life to leave me. I then took my last breath. I felt my soul leave at that moment. I thought I was dead. I guess I just passed out. I awoke with my hands and feet free. I was in a ditch down the street from my house. No bag over my head or tape on my mouth. There was one thing though, a gray skeleton mask beside me. It had a note in it. It said, "Hope you enjoyed our once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be scared by the best. SM." I knew exactly what SM stood for too. Skeleton Man. Look, if you could learn anything from this story, I would want one thing and one thing only. Be careful on the internet. Never click anything that doesn't have anything to do with you. If you think something is suspicious online, then you're probably right. All websites give up information on you. Some just exploit that and things can go very bad. If you ever see a skeleton man ad on the internet, or anything that has to do with scaring people with a skeleton, just do yourself a favor and don't click it. I post this as a warning. Learn from my mistake. I was in bed last night scrolling through Reddit. I'm a fan of horror, and strangely, I actually find it easier to sleep after a good scare. So I was browsing through these short stories, clips, and other horror-based content when I came across a post simply titled, "Don't Rub Your Eyes." As I began reading, half drifting off to sleep, I heard a line that said, "I feel a slight tingling sensation in my left eye. It's almost not even there, except for the fact that I know it is." The line took me by surprise as I laughed at this attempt to unsettle me. Only the thought wouldn't go away. I didn't feel anything in my left eye. Did I? I couldn't tell if it was the brightness of the screen or the fact that the thought was placed in my head by what I was reading, but I felt a twitch in my left eye. At this point, any sensation on my face seemed amplified, as all my attention focused on what I was feeling. Even among being aware of all the sensations on my face, I normally tune out. I was most aware of my left eye. Before long, the faint sensation became difficult to ignore. As I continued to read this story, I thought of raising my hand towards my face, when my eyes diverted to the title once more, "Don't Rub Your Eyes." My heart began to race, a sensation I would normally welcome, but this was different. This felt personal. I wanted to close my phone and just go to sleep, but I couldn't. The sensation in my left eye was growing. It felt like there was dust there, or perhaps a little hair. Nothing that couldn't be solved by just cleaning it away. Yet, I kept coming back to the title of the story that faced me, "Don't Rub Your Eyes." But I couldn't simply leave the feeling be. I couldn't just ignore it. It was bothering me, so I made a decision. I raised my hand and rubbed my left eye, still continuing to read with my right. I could feel the irritating sensation ease up as I rubbed, and I smiled at my own trepidation a few seconds prior. It was just a story, nothing more. Whether it was dust, or hair, or imagined irritation, it was almost entirely faded away, when all of a sudden, I heard a pop. In fear, I dropped my phone and sat up. The bright screen looked up at me. As my left eye cleared, I looked down at my phone, and all seemed fine, except for a strange soreness on my face. I tried to explain it as an understandable byproduct of my efforts to clear my eye. The popping noise, meanwhile, was surely just something to do with plumbing, yet the strange soreness on the left side of my face wouldn't let up, as a creeping suspicion overcame me. I closed my eyes and covered them with my hands, and I could feel it. I told myself I was imagining it, but I could feel it. My left eye felt further into my head than my right. In a panic, I turned on my bedside lamp. Even amidst the new lighting, my phone lay on the bed, on my leg, shining up at me. "Don't rub your eyes." I checked my eyes again, hoping to be proven wrong this time, hoping I could just laugh at my momentary lapse in judgment and go to sleep. If only. My eyes felt more misaligned than before, as my left eye seemed to be retreating into my skull. Unsure of what to do, I tilted my head upward, once again facing the stupid post. The soreness did not seem to fade, and so I tapped the back of my head, hoping to coax the retreating eye back in its place. I don't know the science behind it, but at the time, it seemed a reasonable thing to try. But try as I might, the eye continued to sink. The pain was not significant, which I found strange, only a tangible soreness that took over one side of my face. Perhaps it was the adrenaline rush I was feeling at the time, but by now, my vision began to distort. From my right eye, I could still see my phone looking up at me, but from the left, a strange circular border began to form around what I could see. I tried to close my left eye, but with nothing to hold their form around, my upper eyelid simply dangled when I tried. I'm not sure why, but I grabbed my phone before I jumped out of bed and ran to the nearest mirror. As I saw my reflection, I tried to scream, but the sound was stuck in my throat. The vision from my left eye began to darken as I felt it slide entirely out of its place and fall back, rolling inside my head. I could see from my remaining eye that all that remained was a dark, red, empty hole. I looked down at the phone I was still holding tightly. I read one final time, "Don't rub your eyes." I go hunting sometimes. I own a little piece of land in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. Well, by little, I mean around 300 acres. I inherited this land from my great-aunt Joanne. She used to tell me stories about the weird, almost paranormal phenomena that go on up here. She told me stories of beings made of soft, light rise from the trees at night, or tall, gray beings walked in packs aimlessly, walking through the forest. There was no end to her stories. Of course, I didn't believe in any of them, but found them oddly interesting in their own way. After she passed, I inherited the land from her. I decided to live up there for a while. With the small fortune she left me, I could live up there comfortably for a while, occasionally going into town for groceries. The first few weeks of living up there were nice. I would have a daily routine of getting up extremely early and hunting. Now, hunting is a sacred tradition for me. After my father took me out hunting my first few times, he gave me a list he had received from his dad regarding rules our family needs to follow while hunting. 1. Respect the forest. 2. Never kill for sport. 3. Know what's behind your target before you shoot. 4. If the forest goes quiet, run. No, I never understood what that last rule meant, and neither did my dad, but I didn't let that discourage me from hunting. After a couple months, animals started to get less frequent, like they knew I was the new apex predator for that area. The next couple times I went hunting, I didn't see anything. I mean, anything. I heard the same old cicadas, grasshoppers, or the occasional mating call from a buck or a doe, but never saw a thing. I gave up on hunting for a while. I just chalked it up to me going hunting too much. Weeks went by and winter rolled in. So did the snow. I usually love the snow, but this was different. It seemed to have snowed twice as much in my property than in town or anybody else's property. Weird. It snowed and snowed. Weeks went by and the snow never seemed to stop. In the beginning, I would shovel my front steps, but a new layer would blanket it the next day. I could barely take it. I was cold and miserable, and my food was running out. Since my food was running out, I thought it would be an excellent time to go out and hunt. It was midday, but there had to be some animals out wandering around. So I got all my gear together and trekked the 2 miles to my deer stand. I liked having my deer stand far away from my house, so I could really be disconnected from all aspects of society. It wasn't a long ride to my stand. I'd usually park my vehicle a little ways from the stand so I didn't scare off any animals in the area. When I got to my deer stand, it was covered in snow. It took a while to clear the snow off my stand, but I got there in the end. I waited for a while. I waited and waited, and eventually got nervous. What if I overhunted and ran all the animals from this area? Right when I was about to give up and do the walk of shame back to my vehicle, I heard it. It was a stick snapping under the weight of something stepping on it. My heartbeat started to quicken. I knew it had to have been close, and yet I didn't see a thing. I knew I heard something. I looked all around my front. Nothing. I turned my body so I could see around the tree my stand had been on. Nothing. I went to position my body straight again, and when I did, I saw it. It was a deer, or something resembling one. It was around the same size as a 12-point buck, but it looked gray in the distance. I sensed something wasn't right and zoomed in with my rifle. What I saw won't ever leave me. It looked like a deer, but it wasn't. Its skin was smooth gray. Alien, almost. It had deep black eyes, where its eyes and antlers should have been. It was smooth. Its teeth were like razors. They extended out of its mouth a good few inches. It looked terrifying. Nothing in my life prepared me for this moment. Absolutely nothing. My heart felt like it would beat out of my chest. My breathing was constant but erratic. My hands started to shake, and I had a difficulty keeping my sight on that thing. What was minutes felt like hours. It had to have been standing there motionless for at least 5 minutes. That's when it looked at me with its endless eyes, staring directly into my soul. Then, I shot it. I had been aiming at it this whole time. I don't know why I hadn't shot it earlier. It wailed in agony. It sounded like nothing I've ever heard before. It wailed and wailed as black liquid shot from the bullet hole. And just as quickly as it started wailing, it stopped and dropped on the ground. Right as it hit the snow, I darted down the deer stand and ran the opposite direction from the creature to my vehicle I had parked nearby. I had noticed not a single sound had been playing from earlier, like they just stopped out of nowhere. Then, out of nowhere, I could hear more of those screams, those terrible screams. I ignored them and ran as fast as the snow would let me to my vehicle. When I got to my vehicle, I threw my hunting bag and gun into the passenger seat. I jumped into my vehicle, slammed the door, and locked it. I threw the keys into the ignition, threw it into drive, and mashed the gas. The tires spun and I took off flying through the woods. I saw more of those things on the sides of the trails. They didn't all look like deer. Some looked like squirrels and raccoons, but they all had the same gray skin and smooth bodies. I got home and saw more of them surrounding the tree line of my house. I turned off my vehicle and bolted to the door of my house, their wails getting louder and louder. I burst open the door, turned around and slammed it shut. I thought it was over, and slumped down the door with my back to it. It wasn't over though. Those things started to crash into my house. It sounded like mini explosions going off each time one of the big ones would run into the side of it. They did this for hours and hours. It felt as if the house would come down any second, but this old wooden house stood strong. They wouldn't stop running into the house though. They stopped after around 2 hours of non-stop running into it. I didn't dare go outside for a while. 3 days in fact. I tried to make sense of what those things were, but I have no idea. I have no idea anymore. I don't know if they're still there. I'm too scared to check. Please help me. There I was, lying in my cot, listening to the beautiful but deafening sounds of bugs and critters chirping in the woods of the Maryland mountains. The clock on my wrist told me it was about 3 a.m., and that had a serene quality to it. 3 a.m. A nice time in my opinion. No one needs you to do anything, and you can go alone with your thoughts. Why am I awake at this time? The answer is simple. I needed to piss. I already did that, got out of the tent, and took a steady stream on a nearby tree. The campfire still had glowing embers from the fire my friends and I were tending until about midnight. We then decided to go to sleep. I didn't fall asleep immediately after hitting my cot again. I chose to take the time to stay up a bit, listen to the bugs. The bugs are telling me so many stories and languages only they understand, and it has its perks to it. I heard the rustling from nearby tents, knowing it was just tossing and turning from my buddies nearby. We were 3 in total: Harry, Leo, and me, Jackie. Harry was of a good build, frequented the gym, a little taller than average, had an inexplicably expensive looking haircut, and had looks that would swoon many ladies over, and a couple men. He would totally have wanted to talk to them too, if he wasn't shyer than a 6-year-old around other adults. Took a couple months of saying hello to him next to me in class before he actually responded with hello back. We eventually just got to talking, and about a year of knowing and being friendly to each other, he finally got comfortable around me, and then he wouldn't shut up. I still love that guy though. Then there is Leo, much smaller than the average person. Good looks, but none that were too impressive, but had an attitude that made him get along with anyone. He didn't care about his looks. In 5 minutes with him, other people didn't care either. He was a genuinely nice person to be around, but he thinks that he's a dick. Me, I can't say too much. Taller than the rest of them, average looks, average build, pretty much average in every way. But running, I was the fastest mile, 2 mile, and 5K in the state, at least when I was in high school, although I was able to bring those 2 numbers together into this friendship trio, and that has got to count for something. We've been unbreakable for about 5 years strong. Something rustled in the leaves outside of my tent. It's probably just a squirrel or something, thought to myself. I normally don't get scared of these sounds, but I got an immediate unsettling feeling in my stomach. And then boom, Something basically punches the entry flap of my tent, scaring the living shit out of me. It wasn't the sight of a fist-like thing intending and pushing on the flap of my tent that scared me, but the sudden different sound it made from the bugs. Like when a cat pounces on a paper or a plastic bag. Good thing I already pissed, because I definitely would have pissed myself. And then I heard the zipper opening, and in popped in Leo's face. Holy fuck. You gotta be less ominous out there. I was terrified, I told him after I gained my breath. But then I looked at his face, and he did not look right. Not at all. He was more scared than me. You didn't hear it then? He asked. Hear what? The yelp outside, not even 2 minutes ago? He angrily whispered. No, but I was just pissing out there. Maybe it was me. It wasn't me. I didn't make a sound other than the piss hitting the ground, for the exact reason of not waking them up. Leo looked around and then closed the zipper. We both heard it this time. Oh my god, someone please help me. It was faint, and it seemed to come from far away, probably another campsite. The other sites. Someone needs help. I got to my feet, but Leo forced me down. No, someone else can do it, not us. Are you not telling me this doesn't feel absolutely 100% wrong to you? He looked at me dead in the eyes, and I knew he was right. I was feeling what I felt before, but so much worse now. I just wanted to vomit. Vomit, and then leave the campsite. Right at that moment, the zipper opened again. We both screamed like children as Harry entered the increasingly crowded tent. Damn, now I know how you felt, Leo said as he playfully nudged my arm. Did you guys hear that too? It sounds like someone needs help from another camp. Harry told us as he zipped the tent back up. Should that zipper open one more time? I was going to shit myself. It does, but I'm sure someone else will hear it and help. Besides, I'm too fucking... I started before Leo cut me off. Shut the fuck up, Jackie. I stopped talking immediately and thought he heard another cry for help. I didn't know what to say, besides ask. What did you hear? Well, let me ask you this. What do you hear now? He said in an extremely alarmed tone. Nothing. I hear nothing. Harry chimed, and then my guts immediately receded into my being as I realized exactly what caused Leo to get shaken up. The bugs stopped chirping, and the forest never gets this silent unless... a predator. Please help me. Came from just outside the tent. Everyone in the tent went dead silent as we heard the voice, sounding really wounded and, well, concerning. We just looked at each other in paralyzing fear, none of us moving or making a sound. Please, I'm hurt. I'm so hurt. And the thing is coming. We could all hear the proper noun status of the word thing. Our eyes confirmed it to one another. We sat still for what felt like hours, and then we heard the crunching of leaves outside, indicating something moving away. None of us slept until enough daylight shone on our tent at about 8 a.m. I silently stepped out of the tent and took a brief look around. When I saw no immediate danger of the thing, I signaled the boys and we ran to the car and locked the doors. I took a second to look around the car from the inside through the windows. It was someone that needed help, and they were here. We could help them. What in fucking God's name are you doing? Start the damn car. Harry quietly yelled at me over my shoulder, and then I turned on the ignition. It was as if the roaring of the truck is what caused the thing to jump out from behind a tree, and honestly, it probably was. The thing was hideous. It was humanoid in shape, but easily twice as tall as the average man, around 11 feet. It had pale, fleshy skin that, upon closer look, was covered in hives, like that of bees and hornets. There were green pus coming out of some of the holes as well. It was lanky and skinny, and its face had no eyes, no nose, no hair, and no ears. All of it was just a head-shaped ball with a massive mouth. And oh god, the teeth were the worst part of it all. They weren't razor sharp, they weren't needles, and they were only a little pointy, but they were all human canines, and there were hundreds of them. Each tooth seemed to not belong in the mouth of any other tooth. Fucking had 3 tongues, and all deformed and piled gorily on top of each other, as if it was a kid trying to make a monster out of Play-Doh. Couldn't see us, hear us, or smell us, but it could feel us, probably from the car starting, sending vibrations to the ground, and it could taste us, and we knew tasting us was exactly what the thing wanted. Go, go! Leo started yelling and was cut off as I stepped full throttle on the gas. The car started moving, but before it actually gained speed, the thing was on top of us and slammed its fist into the car door. Leo's car door. Well, fist wasn't the right word. It opened up its hand and closed all the fingers together, as if it was about to palm something, and then I realized that hand now looked sharp. It went straight through the car door. The fingers opened out to get a grip from the inside, and then the door was yanked off the car, leaving Leo exposed. Oh fuck, he started, before the thing did the same thing as the car door, but to Leo's side, and it exited right above Leo's belly button. He extended his fingers, and landed Leo out of the car. Leo! Harry and I both screamed, but we knew it was too late. The car started to pick up speed, and Leo was now but a memory. Only thing left from him was the blood-soaked passenger seat. I looked back through the rear window to see if Leo was somehow okay, knowing full well that wouldn't be the case. It was only for 3 seconds, but I saw the thing stop with Leo in his hand and take 2 massive bites. One on the neck that was so large that there was almost no neck left, leaving the head connected to the body by means of a small amount of bloodied skin, and one on the mouth that took off his complete jaw and his nose as well. I continued driving, not feeling sorrow, as I was in total shock and total fear. Harry, call 911 and tell them where we are. Say our friend was attacked by a bear and was left behind, and we are trying to find the nearest police station. A bear? That wasn't a fucking bear. We can't say giant monster now, can we? They would lock us up in a mental hospital or think we were lying, and lock us up for his death. The fuck was that thing? I don't know, Harry. Now call the cops. It killed Leo, he started, and then we heard the most horrifying thing we ever thought we could hear. The thing we heard is what will forever give it its title of not the thing, but of the imitator. Guys, please, help me. Jackie, Harry, don't leave me behind. I didn't look back, but I knew that Leo didn't say that, even though it was in his voice, perfectly. There was no way he survived those bites. The thing? No. The imitator said that. Against my best judgment, I decided to look back anyway. The thing was still standing tall, not moving, until I looked at him. Then he moved. Then I got a fresh dose of pure fear running through my entire body. Wait, no, that's not right. It was fear, and then it turned its head directly towards me and started running towards the car, and it was gaining on us. Harry turned to look out the back, and I heard a yelp from him as he turned back forward. I looked in the rear view and saw the imitator turn its head ever so slightly, but definitely in Harry's direction, and my theory was basically confirmed. The imitator had only 3 senses left: his taste, his sense of feeling, and another sense only fitting for a monster like him: the sense of fear. As long as we were afraid of the imitator, it knew exactly where we were, and that's horrifying if anything ever was. Just imagine for a second a monster that could sense where you were by your fear reeking off of you, and it looked like that horrible, disgusting thing. If seeing it didn't make you afraid, you were sort of safe. But no one wouldn't feel afraid, and at that fear, it will start chasing you, adding new fear, and then it will gain, adding more fear, a never-ending loop that eventually does end in you being its next prey. The imitator. It uses the cries of help from its previous victims to start the fear. That's why we heard it far the first time, and then close the second time. But why didn't it attack? Well, probably because we were more shocked and concerned than afraid, or someone else was more afraid somewhere else. Eventually, the imitator lost its ground and veered off into the woods, and we got to the police station. We went in, talked to the officers, and people were sent off. Eventually, after hours of us standing there shocked, they brought us into a room to talk to us. It was a bear? We didn't see it really, just heard it. Why? Did you guys see something? Harry asked. I'm not sure you boys are ready to hear this right now. Later, a news report came across televisions all over the mountains to take extra precautions when going out camping. Reports just came in about many dead campers all over the mountains from bear attacks. although no one has seen anything quite like it. The only thing missing from the victims were the teeth, tongues, and the flesh around it. And, wait, this can't be right. Well, anyways, the victims also seem to be missing their vocal cords. Something has gone terribly wrong inside my house. I can't explain how or why. I barely even believe that it has happened at all. Frankly, I have nowhere to turn. No one who would believe me even if I did, so I'm typing this up and posting it here. It's the only option I have. My name is Eric. I'm nobody special. Early 30s, single, trapped in a dead-end job trying away inside a cubicle. I've lived in this house for nearly 5 years now. A nice 2-story suburban place within a clean and safe community. The neighbors are friendly, but I keep to myself. Always have. Nothing special. Until now. This is my story. I woke up on a dreary gray Saturday morning, clouds hanging low in the sky and threatening to unleash a dismal drizzle at their slightest whim. The sour weather kept the street quiet. Normally Saturday mornings were punctuated with the sounds of playing children and the ring of bicycle bells. But today, it seems everyone was content to stay within their homes and watch the rain roll above town. As I swing my legs over the side of the bed and wipe the sleep from my eyes, I shoot a glance at my dull digital alarm clock. 9 a.m. I let out a short sigh. There's really no point in sleeping in, really no point to getting up. I have no plans, no responsibilities, until the work week starts anew. I sit for a few minutes, spaced out on the edge of my bed. Finally I rise and wander to the kitchen to start the coffee pot. As I tiredly walk through the hall and down the stairs, I hear the rain start to patter against the shingles above. Going through the motions like a robot with a failing battery, I prepare the coffee maker, half listening to the streaming put-put-put as the percolator does its daily work. After a moment of staring blankly, my sleep-addled mind begins to wander, becoming jealous of the little machine. At least it always has something to do, some kind of purpose, no matter how mundane. Who knows how long I stood there blankly, half asleep, and debating the metaphysical purpose of the kitchen appliance. By the time I shifted my eyes downward, the carafe was full of hot black coffee. Halfway coming to my senses, I reached to the cupboard and produced my favorite mug, a single white ceramic thing printed on one side with the phrase, "Coffee time," in plain black lettering. Filling the mug to the brim with scalding hot coffee and a heaping spoonful of sugar, I drowsily turn around to place my drink on the kitchen table behind me. As I place the mug down, it loses its balance on the edge, plummeting down. I'm struck with dull surprise as my sleep-addled brain tries to process what is happening, to spur my reflexes into action, but there is no shattering crash. My bare feet are not bombarded by a spray of splintered ceramic glass and boiling liquid. In fact, there is nothing at all. I blink rapidly, shaking myself to my senses. My mug had fallen off the edge into the middle of the table. In the center of the kitchen table, there's a large, perfectly circular hole, probably just under 3 feet in diameter. I stare in confused disbelief as I take in the sight. The hole is dark, inky blackness oppressive even up to the lip of the drop, defiant of the weak gray light that filters through my rain-spattered kitchen windows. Though it's impossible to tell for sure just how deep it is due to the choking shadows within, the hole seems to expand deeper than my eyes can strain to see. Shocked and confused, I lean down to look under the table to get a better look at the pit. Stooping under the table, I see nothing but my kitchen floor. No hole, no coffee mug, just some crumbs of some past meal I had neglected to sweep up. I crane my neck to look at the underside of the tabletop from below. It is perfectly intact. Thinking I must be losing my mind, I rise back up to my feet. The hole is still there, a black fissure in the center of my table. I slowly lean over the edge to take a tentative look at the depths. The darkness is impenetrable, hiding anything that could be below. I wave my hand past the threshold of the pit, expecting to impact with the wooden tabletop. My fingers sink into the hole. The hair inside is frigid cold and heavy with sticky moisture. As I recoil from the shock of freezing temperatures and putting my hand through a void in my own table, my hand brushes against the edge of the hole. Though the table is wooden, the edges of the hole have the feel of smooth porcelain, or textureless hard plastic. I pull back my arm, bringing it up to my face. My hand is shaking from fear, and the cold it had just been plunged into. Rivulets of icy dew have formed on my fingertips, running down past my wrist as I hold my digits before my eyes. Is all I managed to dumbly mumble as I try to process the absurd situation I now find myself in. Outside, the rain intensified to the sound of distant thunder, shifting from a weeping drizzle to a hard pattering shower. It is only then that I notice the shift in the air. A subtle, gentle breeze pulls at the tiny hairs on my arms. No window should be open. I check every night before I go to sleep, especially if rain is in the forecast. The AC isn't running. It isn't even switched on, and yet the air still moves within my kitchen. Pull in, pause, push out, pause, pull in, pause, push out. My guts twist inside me as I understand. The hole, or something inside it, is breathing. I take a tiny step backwards as thunder rolls overhead. The hole continues to breathe. Panic starts to well inside me. A primal misunderstanding of what lay before me inside my own home. I reel back, raising my leg to kick at the offense to physics in some impotent, animalistic way. I slam my bare heel into the edge of the table, a heavy pushing blow to skid the piece of furniture away from me. The kick connects with all the force I can muster. My knee jams and creaks under the pressure, screaming with pain. I feel my foot bend and pop, bruises surely already forming. Crashing back to support myself on the counter that holds my faithful coffee maker, I stare down the pit in my table. I wince as I put weight back on the foot I used to kick. I used to play soccer in high school. That was good form on that kick. The table was just some crappy IKEA model, lightweight, particle board, and some screws. It couldn't have weighed more than a handful of pounds, but there it was, defiant in its immobility. Still the hole breathed, unperturbed by my attack. Slowly creeping forward, I approached the table again. Thunder rolled above my house, shaking the windows in their frames. The hole waited there patiently. Leaning over the table, I craned my neck to stare down into the void once more. The inexplicable pocket of nothing located in the middle of my kitchen. Well, not nothing presumably. Something that breathes, and my coffee mug. I peer into the blackness below, squinting to catch a glimpse of anything at all. As I stare, condensation forms on the smooth edges of the hole, the chill air within forcing the rampant humidity to cling to and run down the sides. It reminded me of that footage you see of a micro camera fed down an old pipe. No, not quite. Perhaps it was closer to the film shot within a body during surgery, or an anatomical study. The dripping sides moved ever so slightly with the breeze of breaths, undulating almost imperceptibly, like an esophagus. Hello? I call feebly into the hole, almost immediately feeling extremely foolish. This was an inexplicable pit in my kitchen table. Why would there be anything that would speak to me inside of it? And even if there was, would I really want to? There was a long moment of silence, with only the noise of the rain outside echoing through the house. Hello? My blood turned to ice, and my breath caught in my throat. A small voice echoed up from the hole, seemingly from some considerable distance. My voice. An echo? It had to be. It made more sense than anything else this morning. With all the courage I could muster, I spoke again. Anyone down there? Second of silence. Then a voice. My voice. Yeah. Hello? The words drifted up from the hole, not an echo but a true response. My heart began to race. What the hell was down there? It sounded like me, but there's no way that could be true. Shaking, I brought myself to speak. Hey, I'm Eric. Who are you? My name's Eric too. We sound a lot alike, came the voice from my table. Yeah, we really do. I slowly responded, unsure of exactly what I was speaking with. Could this really be me? Another me? Or even the same me? So, what are you doing in my kitchen table? My voice in the hole seemed perplexed. In your table? I was just about to ask you what you're doing in my ceiling. Wait, what? Your ceiling? Yeah, the other me responded. You're in a hole about 3 feet across the ceiling of my kitchen, right next to the red stain. My eyes wandered upwards, above my kitchen table. Offset from the hole was an old faded red stain. It was the only reminder of a desperate battle I had waged against a jar of spaghetti sauce nearly 3 years ago. I could never be bothered to clean it all the way off. You threw a mug of coffee at me, busted all over my kitchen table, scared the hell out of me when it hit. That's when I noticed the hole. My mind was racing. Was this really another me? In another of my house? In another of my world? The possibilities were maddening. Why had this hole appeared in my house? My table? I wasn't anyone special. Hey, you still there, Eric? The voice from below echoed up. Yeah, I'm here, I responded, snapped out of my contemplation. If what I'm thinking is true, and I think it is, then you and I are very similar, and I think we're thinking the same thing. I think. I took a second to process that. Yeah, I think. So this could be big, right? My voice tentatively asked from the hole. Yeah, this could be big. We should meet. Make this real. Make it make sense? Yeah, I suppose. You could come down here, Eric. The other Eric asked quietly. The question sent a chill down my spine. Climbed down a hole out of space and time in the center of my kitchen, for what I knew, could be an utterly deadly alternate place. The proposition didn't sit right. I wasn't even entirely sure who I was talking to. I don't know about that, I responded. We don't know how long this hole, or whatever it is, actually is. It could be dangerous, you know. If I slip, I could fall for miles for all we know. The voice was quiet for a while. The rain continued its endless assault on the glass of my windows, as thunder bellowed above. That's okay, Eric. I can come up there. Okay, I guess. I shuddered, caught off guard. Yeah, don't worry, Eric. I can make the climb. The voice shifted from side to side in the hole, as if the source was moving within it. Yeah, alright. I took a step back away from my table. This didn't feel right. None of this made sense, but this felt very, very wrong. My pulse quickened. Within the hole, the sound of squirming movement began, the noise of something dragging itself up the chill and moisture-slick sides of the void. The slithering climb grew closer by the moment. Below I could see only blackness. My voice spoke again within the hole, closer this time. I'm excited to see you, Eric. I think we'll have a lot in common. I'm excited to meet your side of this hole. It seemed strained with effort as it worked its way upwards. Yeah, I'm sure we will, I responded, absent-mindedly. My mind was racing with indecision. Maybe we can have some coffee together, Eric. Black with lots of sugar. My voice was ascending ever closer. In the darkness below, I could just barely begin to make out a shape moving in the hole. Worming its way upward, the inky shadows hid the details of Eric as he climbed towards me. Something snapped in my head as I realized what was bothering me. Whatever was in the hole had told me its name was Eric after I told it that was mine. Mentioned its kitchen after I brought up mine. Could see the stain on the ceiling by looking up through the hole. Could taste how I took my coffee by lapping up what I had dropped. Whatever was down there, it wasn't me. Don't worry, Eric. I'm almost there. Can't wait to meet you. The voice was close now. Mine, but different. Wrong. I hurriedly glanced down the hole in my table. The shape was almost close enough to see in the oppressive dark. An undulating and writhing thing oozing upwards from the cold, wet place that waited below. Its thin, probing tendrils began to breach into the dim gray lights of my home. I spun about, looking for anything I could use to fend off the thing that used my name. My eyes landed on the only thing within arm's reach. Eric, it's time for me to meet you. Eric. The thing slithering from the hole wasn't even attempting to use my voice anymore, its words spilling forth in an awful, gurgling rasp. I spun back towards the hole in my kitchen table, coffee maker in hand. I raised it high above my head before bringing it down in a mighty arc. It sailed from my grasp, plunging down into the void and impacting the thing below with the sound of shattering glass and metal against soft flesh. With a hissing howl, the thing screeched as it fell, plunging back down the pit. I never heard it hit the bottom. I slumped back against the counter that once held my loyal coffee maker, sliding to the floor. I gasped for breath, adrenaline purging itself from my system. More sounds had begun to emanate from the hole, slithering, writhing, dozens of voices calling my name, beginning their cramped climb upwards. I know that these will be my final few minutes, quiet solace amongst the sounds of the storm outside. I only hope that these words find someone who can help, who can come close the hole in my kitchen table for good, before whatever is on the other side spills over completely. I sit here and think of my purpose, the purpose of all of us. The things in the hole, my coffee maker, they're getting closer now. Eric, Eric, they whisper. Their tendrils are reaching out for our world. I could really go for that cup of coffee about now. I should have learned this lesson 4 years ago, when it would have made a difference. But I was young and foolish, and I was on exchange in a foreign country, and like much of what I learned at the time, it slid into half-forgotten memory, only to be painfully jolted back into consciousness at the most inopportune moments, because it has become too easy to forget the things I should remember. 4 years ago, I was in Germany doing a thesis on brick Gothic architecture. The university there had been kind enough to arrange accommodation for us Americans too illiterate to go through the system, and I ended up in a beautiful pre-war building that had been subdivided into residential units. Now only the old German lettering on the facade pointed out its original purpose. Kinderheim. It means children's home, but it actually means more like orphanage, said my flatmate. I had 5 flatmates in total, and he was the one kind enough to give me a tour when I arrived. It was an immense building, and the necessity of the tour had become self-evident when he took me to the basement. As is common in buildings of this scale, its basement was a maze-like network of subterranean corridors, snaking around maintenance rooms and what I assumed were other apartments, as a couple doors led to side exits in the building. My flatmate led me around an impossible number of turns before we got to the grand finale. A large room with industrial washers and dryers. Here, you can wash and hang up, he had said. This interaction encapsulated all the interactions I had with my roommates, quick and functional. We had no animosity that I could detect, but they were all German, and I think they were self-conscious about their English, though I couldn't find much wrong with it when we did speak. I, on the other hand, did my utmost to fulfill the American stereotype by not bothering to learn their language. Why did it matter if I was back home in a few months? I had a quiet existence, which was more or less how I liked it. On occasion, I did get drunk with that group of Americans that invariably forms when we leave our natural habitat, but I preferred to wander the old town streets and pore over references in the library. In the apartment, I rarely left the confines of my room, except to use the bathroom or the kitchen, so it was only a little bit strange when December rolled around and everyone left for Christmas. We were all students or apprentices in that apartment, and we all had parents to go back to, apart from me, who was too broke for an intercontinental round trip. I elected to stay alone in that apartment for 3 weeks, which made up the most wonderful time of the year. I loved it. For these 3 weeks, the apartment became my house. I spread myself into the kitchen, left my boots in the hallway. I populated the freezer with chicken in preparation for the long supermarket holiday. I even left my toothbrush in one of the 2 bathrooms, a smaller one right by the apartment door, whose windows looked down on a side entrance to the building. With so much freedom, my pattern became irregular. Some days I spent cooking, others I spent in bed, only to leave the apartment sometime past midnight on a directionless wander. The town would be beautifully empty, and I was free to go where my boots would take me. This regular irregularity eventually congealed into one blissfully monotonous static. So, it was especially jarring when the doorbell rang in the middle of the night. I was asleep, and when I was awoken I hadn't bothered to check the time. My first response was to be annoyed. It was more a buzzer than a bell, and a loud one at that. Still, it took another ring for me to convince myself I wasn't dreaming. It was a longer one this time, more insistent. At this time of night, I slid out from the covers, dressed only in my underwear. Possibilities rushed through my mind. Was it one of my flatmates who came back early? Had he forgotten his key? My bare feet padded down the long hallway. At the end of it, next to the apartment door, was the intercom system that communicated with the front entrance. I picked up the receiver and put it to my ear. Hello? Involuntarily looked over my shoulder. I hadn't turned on the lights, perhaps out of habit from when I wasn't alone in the apartment. But I was alone. No response came from the other end of the intercom, just static interference. I tried again. Hello? Is there anybody there? Then I could hear the sound of a voice, a woman's voice, crying. I froze, unprepared for this eventuality. 2 of my flatmates were women. Could something have happened? The crying voice further materialized into words. German words. It was a stream of desperate syllables. I couldn't understand anything. Mentally, I cursed myself for not making more of an effort to learn the language, before launching into the only German I knew. Anna? Is that you? Confused. Huh? Came from the other end. Or was it a sob? I tried again. Franzi? There was a pause. Then, as if spurred by the list of 2 unfamiliar names, the crying started again. It was louder. Another barrage of unintelligible syllables through the sobbing, frustration at not being understood, crescendoing her voice into a shout. But this time, I could pick out one word, even with my limited understanding. Help. I then realized that I wasn't hearing her voice solely through the intercom. I took a step into the bathroom. I could hear her sobbing coming in through the bathroom window, the one that looked down on the side door of the basement. That meant she wasn't at the front entrance, where the intercom was. Maybe it was because of this detail that I didn't open the door immediately. I was sure that the intercom was only at the front entrance. The cord was already stretched to its limit, so I set the receiver down to look out the window. It slipped from my cold fingers and clattered down to the tile floor. I left it there, opening the window to crane my head. It was no use. Too dark, and the window was too far out to see the side door. I closed the window. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was an intercom at the side entrance. I went back to press the button that would let her in, but I stopped. She was crying really loudly, obviously desperate, and I was a half-naked foreigner. I ran back to my room to put on some clothes. It took much longer than it should have to find the sweatpants I discarded on the floor, and there wasn't a clean t-shirt in the closet. I dug one out of the dirty laundry hamper, and as I came back into the hallway, I knew that I must have taken too much time. No crying woman would wait this long at a stranger's door before moving on to other options. I got to the intercom and pressed the button. The buzzer sounded, signifying the front door was unlocked, but it was too far away for me to hear whether someone opened it, and if the woman was indeed at the side entrance to the basement, I definitely would not hear it open. I turned the knob, stuck my head out. The hallway was dark. She was gone. She must be. If she had come in, she would have flicked on the house lights, unless she was distraught, vision blurred by tears, and didn't know where the switch was because she was in a strange apartment building. Come on, man. Think. I swung the door open, but again, I stopped. I didn't have the key on me, and the door would lock automatically. I was alone in the apartment, so if I locked myself out, I wouldn't be able to help myself, much less a woman suffering from God knows what. I needed to get back to my room. Just then, I heard voices. They ricocheted off the hard concrete walls of the stairway. I couldn't tell if they came from upstairs or downstairs. There were 2 of them. One was the woman, sobs still in her voice, but she was calmer now, in conversation. She sniffled as she spoke. The other was also female, but lower pitched and calmer. Her questions seemed confused, as if she had just been woken up. I eavesdropped further, but the muffled echoes just sounded like German to me. I went back inside, closed the door behind me. This was probably for the better. Not only did she find someone to help, but someone to actually understand her. It wasn't a job for me. When I slid back into the warmth of my bed, I realized I had been shivering. Strange events on a cold night. I did not expect myself to find sleep anytime soon, but I did. And when I woke up in the morning, I had already forgotten the incident. It became one of those dreams that fell between fantasy and nightmare. The ones so slightly bizarre that the waking mind forgets them until strange details are triggered by moments of deja vu. Even then, it's unclear whether this fragment of the past is real or just a half-remembered dream. I had a Skype call with my parents scheduled that next afternoon. Their morning. It was just to say hi, Merry Christmas, wish I could be there. They like to make Christmas into an all-day thing, and catching them for a moment before they started ended up far less tiring than being there in person. After I hung up, my brain occupied itself with other matters of waking life. What movie to watch today, whether or not to roast the chicken I had in the freezer, how to enjoy the last 6 days of being alone in the apartment. I did not remember the incident from the night before. Even when everyone came back for the new semester, and an ambulance took the body away. I decided to walk home from a morning class that day. The ice underfoot hadn't yet been melted by the winter sun. I only looked up in time to see it pulled out of the driveway. There was a group of neighbors standing at the front entrance, gossiping. One seemed to be crying. In the fray, I noticed my flatmate, the one who had given me the tour on my first day. He beckoned me over. "It's good that it's a cold winter this year," he said in his German accent. "What do you mean?" "Mary from upstairs. Her flatmate came back today and found her. She was dead since a week." Nobody could give a straight answer to how Mary from upstairs had died. "She suffocated in the night," someone said. "No, it was suicide. She did it in the bathtub." It certainly couldn't be murder because in the months I remained in the apartment, no cop came knocking, and being one of the few actually in the building at the time, I would be a person of interest. I was as morbidly curious as the next, but it never seemed a good time to ask. "Excuse me, do you speak English? Can you tell me how that girl died?" Nobody asked those questions, not even the police, it seemed. As time passed, so did the curiosity, until she was just the girl who died. Death happened all the time, today, tomorrow, so on. It was sad and shocking, but explainable. I didn't attend the funeral. Instead, I started an affair with a classmate of mine, an American girl, then went back to Indiana to complete my thesis. I got an A, got a car, got a job, got more debt. I rented a small apartment on the cheaper side of town so Lauren could come over when she could make the 6-hour drive. Life was good, but every time the doorbell rang, I would start to shiver. It was Lauren that noticed it, the first time she came to visit. She had parked her car and rung the bell, and I came downstairs to pull her into a kiss. She grabbed my hand. "You're shivering. Are you nervous?" "Am I? I guess I'm just cold." "Come here, I know how to warm you up." She really did. We decided to stay in bed all day and order in. When the doorbell rang, I was too tired and naked to answer, so she put on a t-shirt and got the pizza. When she came back in, she stared at me. "Are you okay?" I think it was at this moment that started her habit of studying me. Every now and then, I would catch her staring at me while I was preoccupied with whatever I was doing. It wasn't the way a girlfriend would look at her boyfriend, more like an eye through a microscope, watching a bacteria culture, wondering how it moved, and why it wasn't moving now. We broke up when the lockdown hit. According to her, we broke up because I was inattentive and emotionally distant, but she had been cold for a few weeks, and the virus was a convenient catalyst for ending things. With her gone, I was once again left to my own devices. I got laid off. I had nobody to adjust my schedule to. I spent my days cooking and sitting on the couch, chasing every nostalgia that came to me. With her gone, I had nobody to ring my doorbell, to come up and remind me of distant memories, of a time that must have been important to somebody, somewhere. But now a memory is emerging to the surface, a forgotten dream that has to be written down before it slips the mind again, the kind that can only be recalled through a passing moment of deja vu. And now that I can remember more and more, I'm starting to be scared, because the doorbell has been ringing every night. I was about 8 years old when my brother, Cash, started having nightmares. He was almost 2 years younger than me, and with our parents, we lived in a small Cape Cod house in a pretty normal suburb about 30 minutes east of a major city, 30 minutes west of rural farmland. For a while, Cash and I shared one bedroom while my parents occupied the other, just a few steps down the hall. Cash didn't have typical nightmares. They weren't the kind where you wake up and quickly realize you're safe in your bed and you fall back to sleep. No. These were what doctors described as night terrors. He would wake up yelling so loud, it even woke up our neighbors on a few occasions. My parents would rush in, comfort him, and tell him that he was safe. There was nothing to worry about. He is here at home, and it was only a nightmare. You know, the whole spiel. This worked for a little while. He would fall back asleep, and we would wake up the next morning as if it never happened. My parents never really talked about the nightly alarming wake-up calls from Cash, and I never really thought about them either, until one night, when he woke up like usual, but this time, he wasn't just crying. This time he sat upright with his mouth opened, as wide as it could go, screaming like a banshee, screaming over and over and over, frantically pulling at his sheets, and eyes darting back and forth from me to the door to the window in our bedroom. He kept saying, "The crow." Now let me give you some background. We have family who owns farms and spent a lot of our time outside playing. Naturally, we knew many different types of birds and animals, and neither Cash nor I have ever been afraid of them. Plus, we had a dog, Zeus, that often slept in the room with us. He was our protector. A lovable, big old mutt my parents adopted at our local shelter before I was born. But he was really mine and Cash's dog. Zeus obviously woke up when Cash started screaming, and as I watched Cash, awaiting for the inevitable rush of Mom and Dad through the door, I noticed that Zeus was growling and staring at the window. His hackles were raised and his eyes were fixed. Normally, he would jump up in bed with my brother when the screaming started, but he was standing in front of the window with his teeth bared and salivating, as if waiting for a fight with the imaginary assailant on the other side of the glass. Before I had time to question it, my parents threw open the door, and my mom rushed over to hold Cash. He just kept repeating, "The crow. The crow is going to get me." The night air was unusually warm for September in Pennsylvania, so we had left my bedroom window open. My dad took note of Zeus and moved to close the window and look outside. As soon as my dad got close to it, my brother lost his damn mind. I'm not kidding. He literally flung his tiny body out of my mother's arms and ran down the hallway to my parents' room and hid under the bed. I was left alone with Zeus after my dad locked the window and moved to follow my mom and brother down the hall. Zeus wasn't growling anymore, and it didn't seem as if my dad was concerned, so I let it go. When it was just me in the room, Zeus jumped up on my bed and put himself between me and the window. It was weird. Something he had never purposefully done before, but sleep soon began to take back over, and I laid down to cuddle up with Zeus. The next morning, my mom and I ate breakfast alone with my dad, and Cash stayed in bed. She told me that they had spent 2 hours trying to convince him that he was okay, but he wouldn't stop going on about some crow in his dream, and had been awake for most of the night. He told her it was crawling towards him, and he couldn't run away fast enough, and when he woke up, he thought he would be okay, but then he saw it staring at him through our open window. Naturally, my parents believed this was just a hallucination, a product of the nightmare-fueled haze clouding his mind and eyes, but I had never seen him react that way, and honestly, I never wanted to see it again, not to mention seeing how Zeus reacted. I'll admit, while I normally ignored Cash's nightmares, I was a little freaked out this time. It was Saturday, so my mom took us to the park to enjoy the warm weather while it still lasted. If you are at all familiar with southwestern Pennsylvania, you'll know we need to enjoy the sun when we can. Next to Seattle, we have the most days of cloud cover throughout the entire calendar year. It is literally gray and raining almost all year round, so a beautiful warm Saturday playing outside was exactly what we needed after such an eventful night. Cash and I played for a long time by ourselves, and when other kids started to arrive at the park, we all decided to play a game of release. If you're not familiar with that particular name, as it has many, it is essentially hide and seek, and tag put together, and with teams. One team are the seekers, and one is the hiders. The object is for all seekers to successfully locate the hiders, bring them to the designated jail spot, and hope to catch them all before any unlocated hiders were able to release their jailed compatriots by sneaking up to the jail and fleeing before being recaught. The park by our house is mostly surrounded by woods that are perfect for this game. They aren't big or even particularly thick woods, but to a young kid, they could be pretty freaky if you were alone, and it was easy to get turned around. As the seekers started to count, the hiders all dashed for the trees, searching for the best spot. I told Cash to stay put, as I carefully hid him behind a fallen tree before going back to look for my own hiding spot. He wasn't particularly fond of having to hide alone, but I didn't stick around to listen to him complain. I was more concerned with not getting caught. As I ran from Cash, I saw a perfect tree and began to climb, smiling to myself at how perfect my hiding spot would be. I wasn't up there long when I heard Cash scream. It chilled me to my core, as it sounded exactly like his screaming last night. He wasn't screaming because he was caught. He was terrified of something. Instinct kicked in, and I quickly made my way out of the tree and back in the direction I left him. I was closing in on the old fallen tree when I saw it. A large crow sitting atop the mossy bark, not 5 feet from Cash. Cash was lying in the fetal position with his hands covering his ears and screaming "crow" over and over like he did last night. The bird was huge. I'm not sure if you've ever been up close to a crow before, but they're bigger than you might first expect. Usually around 1.5 feet beak to tail, and this one was even bigger than that. It was staring directly at Cash. I was completely frozen in place from sheer confusion when I started to hear the other kids make their way in our direction and snapped out of it. Picking up a rock, I took aim and fired at the bird's head. I missed. My rock landed pitifully far away, and the bird moved closer to my brother. I bent to pick up another when the bird turned and looked straight at me. Cash was still laying on the ground, but had thankfully gone silent. Another rock flew from my hands, this time connecting with the tree where the bird was perched only seconds before. It dodged the rock. It knew what I was trying to do, and it dodged the rock. I was frozen with my arm half raised to throw my third rock, when 3 other hiders emerged from the bushes. Just as they approached me, the bird squawked and flew off, unfurling its massive wings the color of oil. It took me a moment to come back to my senses and drop the rock, and try to calm down Cash, who was gently sobbing and still covering his ears. Some of the other kids were frightened by the scene and had run to get my mom. As she picked up Cash and grabbed my hand to leave, I heard the crow again, calling from somewhere in the treetops as it watched us leave the woods and head back to the park. We left and went home after that. Cash's nightmares continued on the same way for a few weeks, and each one involved the crow. Eventually, my parents chalked it up to the fact that stores and commercials had started to advertise Halloween decorations, and he must have seen the one that manifested itself in his nightmares. The nightmares were starting to take a toll on all of us. No one in the house was getting any sleep. Cash was becoming a gray, zombie-like shell of a little boy. The doctors told my parents it was a lack of sleep, and suggested trying some pediatric-dosed melatonin, but it wasn't working. Zeus had taken to avoiding our room completely. The only positive was that we hadn't seen the crow since that day at the park. The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. As an 8-year-old, I wasn't able to put into words what I was frightened of. I didn't want my parents to think that I was trying to get attention, but I was afraid to tell them that maybe Cash was afraid of something real. I hadn't told my mom about seeing the crow on the tree that day. I didn't intentionally not tell her, but I didn't know how to explain it. How could I explain that it seemed as if it were trying to scare Cash, or how it stared at me with nothing short of disdain when I tried to scare it away? I decided it was best to keep it to myself. I woke up in the middle of the night one day in mid-October to hear my parents arguing in the kitchen. My parents never, ever argue with each other. Overcome with curiosity, I tiptoed my way to the top of the stairs that led into our kitchen, hoping to catch a snippet of their conversation. They were arguing about Cash. My mother wanted to take him for a sleep study, and my father felt it unnecessary. They had taken Cash to a few doctors since the nightmare started, hoping to find a solution for him, and maybe even more for them. Earlier that year, my parents found out they were again expecting, and we were well underway in the construction of our house addition. My favorite part of the whole thing was being able to have my own room. My dad had designed the addition to be even larger than the original house, with enough bedrooms for my parents, me, Cash, the new baby, and even another one if they decided. Nearing the completion, my mom was growing even more concerned with the thought of Cash being in his room alone. Dad wasn't as concerned as she was. He grew up with the mentality of boys need to be tough, and well, he was a wonderful and loving father. He sometimes was a little harder than he needed to be. Being that Cash was only 6 years old, bored with their back and forth, I started to take my way back to my bed, stepping on the wrong floorboards, and alerting my parents to my eavesdropping. Caught red-handed, I shuffled into the kitchen and sat at the table with my parents. Honey, we aren't mad, but we don't like it when you listen to private conversations between your dad and me. My mom said in a honey-sweet tone. She really was the best. I know I'm not, but I heard you talking about Cash and I was scared. And I didn't want to tell you, but the crow is real. I saw it. It was in the woods, and I think Zeus saw it in the window, and now he won't come in our room, and I don't want to sleep in there alone. I don't want to be scared like Cash. It all came spilling out of my mouth like word vomit, and I started to cry. Rye, sweetie, there is nothing to be afraid of. Cash's nightmares are just that, nightmares. They are not real and they cannot hurt him. You or us. And the bird you guys saw in the woods, it's just a bird. There are thousands of them and you've been around birds hundreds of times. I promise I won't let anything, or any bird, hurt you or Cash. My dad rolled his eyes at the or any bird part and hugged me tight. Okay, if you promise. I didn't know what else to say, so I sighed, hugged them both, and went back up to my bed. Zeus was standing in front of our room pawing at the door and whining when I got back upstairs. I was just so happy that he wanted to come back in with us that I didn't think twice before opening the door and hopping in bed, expecting Zeus to follow, but he didn't follow me in. He stood at the threshold watching our window. It wasn't open tonight and our blinds were shut, so there is no way he could have seen anything, but he sensed it. He knew something wrong was on the other side of the glass, and he did not want to go near it. I called him once, twice, 5 times before getting out of bed to try and pull him into the room. The moment my feet hit the carpet, I heard a tap. Chills ran down my spine. I stopped and listened again. It had to have been my imagination, or the floor creaking. Our house was old and made lots of noises when it settled at night. Did a branch from our maple tree hit the window? Yeah, it was a branch. I took one step and heard another tap, tap. Then nothing. Tap, tap. That wasn't the tree. Something was tapping the windows. Screaming, I ran back downstairs to my parents, still in the kitchen and still arguing over what to do with Cash. It's back. It's outside the window and it's going to break in. My dad immediately flew upstairs to check my room, as my mom and I followed. Zeus was slowly backing his way down the hall, and never moving his eyes from our room. My dad lifted the blinds. Rye? It's just the wind making the tree hit the window. Nothing is out there. Cash, did you hear anything? Where's Cash? My dad's question caught me off guard. He was right there when I came back to bed, wasn't he? Cash wasn't in our room. We checked every single room in the house, under my parents' bed, in the laundry room, basement, heck, I even looked inside the dirty clothes bin. He just wasn't there. Panic was etching lines into my mom's forehead as she ran from room to room yelling Cash's name. Just as she picked up the phone to call 911, we heard him scream. His scream was coming from outside. Dropping the phone, my mom ripped open the back porch's sliding door to a pitch black night. She and my dad ran outside in the direction of Cash's yells, and eventually found him. To this day, we cannot explain how he was found where he was. Cash was 2 houses away, in a tree, about 25 feet in the air. The commotion of my parents' frantic calls and my brother's panic screams alerted a few of our neighbors to call the police. My brother was so high up in the tree that my father couldn't climb it for fear of it snapping under his weight. We had to rely on a fire truck to eventually pluck him from the branches. Cash was dazed and seemed unaware of exactly what was happening when they finally brought him down. My parents sat at their kitchen table, Cash fast asleep in my father's arms, as my mother passed a cup of coffee to the 2 officers who had been dispatched. It was generally accepted that Cash had been sleepwalking and must have climbed up into the tree. But when asked how he could have gotten out of the house unnoticed, no one had an answer. The officers left shortly after, and we were left alone to digest the past few hours' events. When I woke up the next morning, I jumped into Cash's bed and made him wake up. I knew he hadn't slept much, but I wanted to ask him why he went outside and why he climbed the tree. "I was trying to get away from the crow," he said matter-of-factly. "Cash, there is no crow. Dad even said so. The one at the park was just a regular old bird." I didn't know if I was more trying to convince him or convince myself. "It was tapping on the window trying to get in, so I tried to hide, but it was crawling on the window outside, so I ran and climbed a tree because it can't get me, because it was crawling and not flying." His explanation left me stunned. Not because he had managed to climb 25 plus feet into the air while seemingly sleepwalking. He heard the tapping. There's no way Cash was sleepwalking. I heard the tapping too, and I was completely awake. Something was tapping on our window, and it wasn't the tree. Was it the crow from the park? No. That one could fly, and Cash said this one was crawling. That was just a regular bird. And I was letting Cash's nightmares invade my mind too. Right? Cash wasn't himself for days following that night's incident. He became withdrawn, quiet, afraid of the slightest noise. He didn't want to talk to me very much, but if he did, it always went back to the crow. Zeus was still not going anywhere near our bedroom, and I started to avoid Cash as well. I missed playing with my brother. The leaves were falling, and we should be jumping into a big pile of them, instead of him clinging to either my mom or my dad's leg for every waking second. Zeus and I went outside in the front yard to watch my dad raking the grass and bagging the leaves. I wanted to go play, but I couldn't find it in me, so I was content to sit and watch. The sky was its usual Pittsburgh gray, and the wind was biting, shaking its way up and into my coat and making me shiver. I held on to Zeus and started to make my way back inside when I saw Cash peering out from behind a pillar on our front porch. I decided to try and make him happy, even if just for a second. Maybe he could forget he was afraid, and we could go back to normal. Grabbing Zeus's collar, I dashed towards the pile of leaves my dad was preparing to bag, and threw myself into it. I made a show of laughing and yelling with Zeus, asking Cash to come play with us. He looked apprehensive, as if going further from the confines of our house would cause him terrible pain, but a small glint in his eyes told me he wanted to join in on the fun. I think my dad noticed too, laughing. He scooped me up into his arms and ran around the yard. Zeus hot on his heels. I could see Cash smiling. It was working. I jumped from my dad's arms and ran to Cash, taking his hand and pulling him into the yard with us. We played hard. We ran and ran and ran, until all three of us collapsed on the ground in fits of laughter. My dad hugging and wrestling with us in the cold November ground. My mom holding her very pregnant belly, with one hand while snapping out of focus pictures with her new Polaroid in the other hand. It is a bittersweet memory. Sweet because of the innocence of the moment, the sheer joy of two children playing with their dad, the love of their mother watching her husband make beautiful memories with their children. Bitter because it was the last time it would ever happen again. Zeus noticed it first. A large black crow standing across the street in the center of our neighbor's lawn. It was staring at Cash. Cash and I both realized something was wrong when Zeus stopped wrestling with us and adopted a protective stance, pacing himself between us and the street. Us and the crow. Dad was calling him, trying to get his attention off the strange bird across the street. Zeus, not moving a muscle, forced my dad to return to the house in search of the leash. While we lived in a quiet neighborhood, our street had a lot of traffic and he didn't want Zeus taking off and getting hit by a car. The crow started walking towards us. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. This was the same one from the park, the same one who made Cash leave our house in the middle of the night, the same one that had been tapping on our window. I started to back up. Cash was still frozen. His face was completely white, hands trembling, eyes wide and fixed on the crow. I tried to grab him, but he wouldn't budge. A dark stain started to form on his pants, his fear causing him to lose control of his bladder. "Dad?" I called out. Not really sure what I was hoping he would do, but I couldn't think of anything else. I watched as it walked into the street, and only 4 feet from our yard. Zeus started to try and go after the crow, and my dad was struggling to hold on to his collar. Cash, still frozen still, started to emit the loudest, Most high-pitched scream I have or ever will experience. He didn't sound human, his primal fear overriding any semblance of coherent thought. His nose started to bleed, and blood vessels in his neck were bulging out. Just then, I saw a car turn onto the road out of the corner of my eye. It was going fast. Faster than it should be. 3 houses, 2 houses, 1 house away. The sound of the car's bumper colliding with the crow was loud and hard and heavy, as if the bird had more weight to it than it appeared. Zeus stopped and we all stood there watching the car speed down the road without a single brake light to be seen. Just as fast as it appeared, it was out of sight. I turned my gaze back to the spot on the road where the crow became all too familiar with the feeling of metal. It was there, a massive black clump of feathers, its wings and legs broken in strange angles. I took a step forward, needing to get a closer look when it moved. Its head lifted and turned to Cash, and started to crawl in his direction. All the while its broken beak, irreparably twisted open, began to mimic the exact same sound as Cash. It was crawling at him, just as he had dreamed of for months on end. My dad's shovel swiftly cut through the crow's neck, severing the head and allowing it to roll away in its broken and mangled body. Its eyes landing on my brother once more as Cash fell to the ground. Cash was never the same after that. He attended therapy 4 days a week, every week since that day. I still have no idea what really happened, and I get chills thinking about it now, even 27 years later. Cash killed himself when he was 19. He moved out the day he turned 18 and never spoke to any of us again. He would write us letters and send them from various zip codes, so we never knew where he settled, if he even did. He never wrote about the incident or the crow, but when the police found his body, he had a backpack full of drawings, many of them depicting crows or demons or other variations of them. They were dark. You could feel the pain and anger he poured into them. See how tortured his mind was. I miss him so much. The therapy never gave us any insight to what, if any, connection there was between Cash and that stupid fucking bird. I really wish it had. I have a 5-year-old daughter, Cassandra, Cass for short. She looks a lot like him. I wish she could have known him. So many things about her remind me of him. Lately, she's been having nightmares. And last night, I saw a crow on my mailbox when I got home from work. I wanted to climb Mount Everest when I was a kid. Well, my mom and dad did. I heard them talking about it one night after I'd come home from school. Ever since then, the thought of it stuck in my head. I loved everything to do with snow, the texture, the crisp coolness of it, and the wave of heat you felt the second you stepped inside, boots squeaking against the hardwood floor as you tracked the powder in behind you. But my favorite thing was the silence of it all. Somehow, the snow muted everything. You could shout as loud as possible, and all you'd hear is a whisper in response. It was magical. It really, truly was. I can't really say that had anything to do with Christmas, unlike most, though I am a fan of the holidays as well. But the fact remained, I adored the snow-covered peaks and valleys of Oregon, where I'd grown up. I'd head up to Timberland Lodge each winter with my parents, grab some hot apple cider at the cafe, and ski each day to my heart's content. It was my favorite time of the year. My parents, they passed away last month. I decided to carry the torch in their absence and booked a round trip to Nepal. I know, traveling at a time like this. Please don't judge me. The grieving process has been less than kind to me, and it was the only thing I could think of doing after the funeral. In terms of actual logistics, I'd be staying at a lodge near the base of the mountains, which, of course, resulted in quite a few signed waiver forms. I remember thinking that by the end of it all, I'd probably have to be seen for carpal tunnel. I knew that, should the weather be bad, my trip would be fruitless. Going up the mountain was already a dangerous feat by itself, made impossible by bad weather. Of course, what I didn't account for was the unpredictability of it all. You can already see where this is going. I wish I had. The day I arrived at the base of the mountain, I came prepared. A warm parka, 2 hats, 2 pairs of gloves, etc. Notably, I had some MREs in my backpack just in case. I didn't bother bringing fire starters. due to the guide carrying them. Just a small camping stove and fuel for a few uses. This was all in case of emergency. Warm food was better than frigid, I remember thinking. I met up with my group, 4 others. Another woman and 3 men. Our guide, one of the men, was tall with a scruffy beard. "My name is Jamie," he introduced himself. "I'll be your guide on our hike for the next several days. It's long and grueling, and I want everyone to know that there is no shame in backing out now." He paused for a moment, nodding once he realized no one would be volunteering their resignation on this mission. "There are 6 camps on the route to the top. We're currently stationed on the first one, at the very bottom. The entire trip can take up to 2 months, so I hope you all found really good babysitters," he joked, causing a few dry chuckles. He cleared his throat awkwardly, tugging on his jacket. The rest of his speech was mostly explaining when we'd be stopping for breaks and where. You'll notice that the trip for me did not take 2 months. I left early last month, on the 8th. Nothing went as planned after a while. The first few weeks went as smoothly as possible. I slept in the chill each night, eating around a campfire and getting to know my group. Abigail was a mother of 2 who had just flown the nest. Luke had just dropped out of college and was seeking himself, he'd said. Dennis was a father who'd lost custody of his kids and simply had nothing better to do at this time. I heard that usually groups were bigger, but with everything going on in the world, they tightened up the reins significantly. Abigail called it quits at the second camp, bidding all of us a tearful farewell after exchanging numbers. That left 3, and those 3 would stay with me until I was utterly and completely alone. But let's not skip ahead just yet. Things started to go haywire the 3rd week. I'd woken up in the middle of the night to a knock on my cabin door. Upon opening it, I saw Luke. He shifted nervously in front of me, pale as a ghost. I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, he'd bounded past me and inside the cabin. I poked my head out the door to see if anyone had followed him, but he'd come alone, so I pulled my sweater tighter around me and shut it. "Something's wrong with this place," Luke was murmuring, pacing in my small assigned kitchen space. "I saw something out in the trees. Probably a snow leopard or a bear. Jamie warned us about those," I'd reassured him as I started a fire. "Why don't you have a seat? I'll make you some tea." "It wasn't. I'm pretty sure it was a person." "Oh, well, that's not abnormal," I commented as I put the kettle on. "On Mount Everest?" he asked, still slightly panicked. I exhaled. He was worried over nothing. I thought to myself, here he was waking me up at an ungodly hour over what? A shadow? A mirage in the barren snow-covered peaks? "Luke, we're in the middle of a densely populated camp. Of course there would be people wandering around." He opened his mouth to say something in response, but I cut him off once more. "Even out of bounds? It's not uncommon." It didn't feel right to me," he finally admitted, looking into the flames. I listened to the kettle whistle, moving to pour the tea, and then walking over to hand him a warm mug. "Look, I'm sure everything is fine, but we can talk to Jamie about it in the morning if you're that concerned. I'll go with you," I offered, giving him a tired smile. This seemed to relieve him as he sank into the couch by the fire. He fell asleep there. I didn't bother moving him, and just decided to wake him up the next day. We went to voice his concerns to Jamie in the morning, but they were brushed off the same way I'd brushed them off the night before. Things only got worse from there. Luke continued to spot figures in the mountain tops, and even Dennis verified a couple of these sightings. I eventually just had to resign myself to believing them. Even though I hadn't witnessed anything myself, I'm not sure why it treated me differently. I still wonder what would have happened if it didn't. A storm hit that week. Terrible. It caught us completely off guard. We were given the chance of falling back, or of pressing forward. Dennis chose to backtrack to the previous camp, while Luke, Jamie, and I pressed onward. It was a terrible choice. I found myself staggering through a blizzard so violent, I couldn't see my hands in front of my face. It was just a white haze. "Luke? Jamie?" I'd call over the howling wind, hugging myself tightly as I walked. No response for a while, and then screams. I heard them that night over the wind. Though rescuers say I was delusional, they were terrible dreams of someone being completely mauled. I stumbled across Jamie's body not long after, horribly disfigured, dark red blood splattered over the snow. I vomited bile into the snow next to my recent discovery, having already run out of MREs the previous few weeks. I hadn't eaten in a day. "Sarah?" I heard the next evening. A desperate cry over the wind. I followed it urgently, with cries of my own. "Luke?" I'd found him, huddled under a shelf of rock. He was in a sorry state. His lips were cracked and stained with blood, and his fingertips were ice blue. He must have lost his gloves at some point. I gave him a pair of mine. He'd also managed to start a small fire in the time he'd been there. I wish later on I'd asked him how, but I never did. I won't get the chance to now. We'd spent the night holding one another, whispering reassurances and reveling in the warmth of human touch. He was dead when I woke up. Dehydration. I sat there for a long while, staring at his corpse with such a hunger. 2 days without food. I continued on, leaving it untouched. What other choice did I have? I spent the next 2 days wandering in the wind and the ice. Finally, I collapsed into the snow. It beat down on me, the wind cutting into my skin and leaving it raw, exposed or not. It didn't matter anymore. The last thing I felt was a warmth as I slipped into unconsciousness. The officials say they found me at the foot of the mountain, in better health than expected. I lost my left hand but managed to keep my other limbs intact. They said it was an unexplained miracle, and chalked the death of Jamie up to a bear mauling. It isn't uncommon, they explained. I told them I didn't know how I got down to the foot of the mountain, but that's the partial truth. The real truth came in bits and pieces later on. It came in the memory of being dragged by something through the snow, into the makeshift hovel, in the middle of nowhere. It came in the memory of delirious fevers, and something kneeling over my hot body, slipping wet meat into my mouth, raw meat that I ate desperately. It came in the memory of being dropped at the foot of the mountain, and of a sound from a creature that bellowed to alert anyone nearby, a sound just barely muted by the falling snow. I'm so hungry now. It doesn't matter what I eat. I know it isn't enough to sate my appetite. I don't know what happened on that mountain, but I know that it changed me irreversibly. I'm flying back next week. I have to find out the truth, and I have to eat.